So in this pilot study, we applied the LCPC transform to analyze particle shapes of titanium alloy crystals. These images were provided by the lab of Andrew Miner at the University of California, Berkeley. And in this study, they mixed aluminum and oxygen into titanium. And they tested the effect of different concentrations of oxygen, which increases the toughness of the titanium. And they also increased the concentration of aluminum, which increases the ductility of the titanium. And we notice here, just by visual inspection, that as the aluminum concentration increases, the size of these particles gets smaller and they become more dense, right, per field of view, per each of these fields of view. And that the effect of adding oxygen also decreases the size of each crystal, each particle, but to varying, a size of the particles. As a quick pointer on how our LCPC transform works, first we segment each particle and define its outline. We then calculate its centroid, and that centroid is defined as the origin of a 360 radial grid separated by 5 degrees. And we then calculate the distance between the center and each intersection between a radial line and the edge of the object, as can be observed here in step 3. And then we just linearize this by, as shown in step 4, in which the radial lines are from 0 to 360. And we then apply the fast Fourier transform to this data to obtain a frequency plot that represents the shape that we started with. And then in order to turn each shape into a scalar value, we just summed all the bins of the magnitude of each bin to derive one number representing the original shape. And for the data presented in this talk, the method of deriving a scalar value was to sum the magnitudes of all bins. Further information can be obtained by selectively picking which bins to objectively sum, but that has not been explored on these samples yet. So due to the wide range of particle sizes in every image, that is, each image has very small particles and very large particles, when you compare each of these images in terms of every single particle collectively, you can't see a difference, both in terms of the shape that we measure and in terms of the area that we measure. And so we need a more refined approach. But before I go into that approach, I want to say that the 0% oxygen samples were omitted because there are too few particles in those images. If we had more fields of view, then we'd be able to do the same analysis. So our approach was to separate the scatter of each image in terms of its particle sizes into quartiles. The quartile 4 represents the largest particles, as you can see here in this sample image. Quartile 1 are the smallest particles, which are also obvious to the naked eye. And quartiles 2 and 3 are the mid-sized shapes that are actually hard for the naked eye to distinguish, because as here in the sample, in the image, you can see that they generally have the same shape, and it's difficult for the human eye to distinguish them. So our approach is to compare the same quartile across each of the categories. When we do that, we find very interesting effects. So here we see that there seems to be some sort of threshold effect. Particularly, let's focus on quartile 2, right? And that threshold effect is, so for 2 and 4% aluminum, whenever you add more oxygen, right, there's an increase in the average magnitude of each particle, right? Say the average size of each particle. But this effect is inverted once you reach 6% aluminum. And this threshold effect is present in quartile 2 and quartile 3. Again, these are the mid-sized particles, quartiles 2 and 3. You see evidence of that in quartile 1, the smallest sized particles, right? And you see a hint of that in quartile 4, which are the largest sized particles. So it seems that most of the effect of these conditions are observed in the mid-size enrichment of the mid-sized particles, which are hard for the human eye to distinguish, but quite clearly detectable by shape. When you look at just the 0.1% oxygen conditions, you see a nonlinear effect as we increase the concentration of aluminum. There's this inflection, right, or U shape, and that's present consistently in all 4 quartiles. If you look at 0.3% oxygen categories, you see a very nice inverse correlation between the concentration of aluminum and the average magnitude of particles, or average size of particles. And this inverse correlation is present in quartiles 2 and 3, again, the mid-sized particles, quartiles 2 and 3. You see that also in quartile 1, the smallest particles, and you see a hint of that in quartile 4, which are the largest particles. Now, to show the efficacy of measuring shape by LCPC, we also did the same analysis using area, a traditional measurement of shape. And let's look at, revisit the threshold effect we observed when we measure shape via the LCPC. Right, at 6% concentration of aluminum, there's an inverted effect due to addition of a higher concentration of oxygen. This effect is only present in quartile 2 if you measure area, right, and absent in quartile 1 and very weak in quartiles 4 and 3. So this slide shows you that measuring area, or shape, via the LCPC transform gives you much cleaner and more consistent data than does measuring area. And then when we look at the 0.3% oxygen concentration in aluminum, right, the inverse correlation effect we see nicely in all 4 quartiles, or 3 of the 4 quartiles, when we measure shape via LCPC. This is absent in area, right? In fact, area shows that U-shape effect, right, a nonlinear effect. Interestingly, when you look at the 0.1% oxygen situation, LCPC shape measure reveals a U-shape effect, a nonlinear effect, but it's area that shows a nice increasing, right, positive correlation between the concentration of aluminum and the average area of the particles. So in this case, if you want to develop a machine learning model to classify titanium that has 0.1% oxygen, area is actually a good feature to include. So in conclusion, particle shape measured by the LCPC transform, 1, reveals a depth of insight about particle shapes that area cannot. And 2, it provides cleaner and more consistent data than does area. And lastly, it can be used in conjunction with area for machine learning purposes.